What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Next Man Up podcast. I'm your host, Bannon Crowley. I'm here with my co-host, Colin Martin. How are we doing today?
Doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. A lot of teams are doing very good in the NBA too, as we saw a lot of big trades going on with Damian Lillard. We also saw Drew Holiday, who we speculated about last week. So, just starting this episode off with the main question on a lot of people's minds in the NBA. Who is the best team in the East right now? After we saw Dame go to the Bucks, after the Celtics have kind of bolstered up this team a little bit with Porzingis, Drew Holiday, the Sixers still have an MVP candidate. You could talk about the Cavs being a good young team, but I want to know, who do you think is the top dog in the East right now?
Oh yeah, for me it's got to be the Celtics. I think you could have seen this one coming. Obviously, I'm a Celtics fan. I love to talk about them, but I mean, just look at the starting five. Drew Holiday is a very much improved version of Marcus Smart, who found a lot of success in Boston for years. Obviously, sad to see him go, but Holiday's the better player. Derek White is a superior defender in the backcourt, and we'll talk about this later. When you have to guard superstar talent at the guard position, like the Bucks now have, I'll take Drew Holiday and Derek White as a combo over anyone else in the league. I think they run it pretty well back there. Jaylen Brown is happy. He's on a new contract, still one of the better players in the league. Jason Tatum is going to be fighting for a top five spot if he continues to play well this year. Not quite there right now, but could be soon. And Porzingis, I think, has finally beat the always injured allegations. He's had two relatively healthy years in Washington and looks solid in that time. I mean, just on paper, no one's stopping that starting five in the entire league, much less the East. I know the Bucks have a lot of the good things going on. I'll let you talk about them in a little bit. But even the bench, I know a lot of people are worried, but Al Horford was a playoff starter for the Celtics for years, and he was really good. Now he gets to come off the bench, or he'll start with Porzingis. Either way, he's still one of the better, six man, fifth man in the rotation guys in the league. There's some other worries there, but Celtics fans have talked about Peyton Pritchard for years now. It seems like he'll finally get the chance to run that backup point guard spot. Could look good. And then some signings in the offseason that went under the radar that are going to get playing time and time in the playoffs, hypothetically. O'Shea Brissett is a guy I really like. Lamar Stevens I like. Jordan Walsh looked really good in the summer league. Maybe he'll get some time. The Celtics just look really good. Joe Mazzulla is back at the helm for head coach. I know he had some troubles last year, but clearly the team has faith in him. He's learned from his mistakes last season, and he has a big, squad under his name. He has a lot to prove, and I think he will. I'll let you talk about your squad here, whether it's the Bucks, whether it's the Sixers, but I really think the Celtics team has made the decisions that they've done this offseason to win the championship. They're sick of being close. They're sick of making it and losing. They want to win it now, and I think this is the roster they had to build to do it.
Yeah. And, I would love to come on here as a Sixers fan and say that they have the best roster or they can compete. I think they can compete. I think this team will be solid, but looking on paper, I think you got to give it to the Bucks, in my opinion, in the East. A lot of underrated signings. They got Cam Payne the other day, who is going to be a good backup for them behind Damian Lillard, who they just traded for too. They're coming in with a new coach, a new philosophy. And you still have Giannis, who I think you can make an argument is still the best player in the NBA. I think him and Jokic and Embiid and whoever else you want to put up there, it's pretty close. Giannis, I think, still has that explosiveness. He's still young. He's going to go out here with Damian Lillard. And we can't forget about Chris Middleton. There's been some times where he's been hurt before, but if he can play to the level that we saw him play before, that all-star level, he's going to be the third option on this team, and he's going to be one of the best third options in the league overall. I know the past few years we've talked about guys like Tobias Harris being one of the best third options, but now you have Chris Middleton, who could be an all-star, who has been before. Obviously, you lose Drew Holiday, but you're getting Damian Lillard, who's better. Cam Payne's going to come off the bench well for them. I think the mix of Malik Beasley and Pat Connaughton, who I saw him this summer, he saw me hit a birdie at the Ledges Golf Course. Shout out to Pat Connaughton, Mass native. These guys, overall, I think this depth chart is very good. Like you said, the Celtics may have the best starting lineup. I think you could definitely make an argument that the Bucks are just up there too. Brook Lopez, one of the best defenders in the league. Giannis, one of the best players overall. Dame, one of the best point guards in the league. Chris Middleton, an all-star type player. And then outside of that, whoever you put in at shooting guard between Malik Beasley, Cam Payne, Pat Connaughton, they can all spit these minutes around. And when we look up against matchups, it would be very interesting to see how these two teams play against each other, because I would assume that guarding a guy like Giannis, you'd probably put Porzingis out there. at that point, I don't think you can really put Jason Tatum to guard Giannis. Giannis just too big to really be guarded by pretty much anyone in the league up to this point. We usually see teams when they've gone against the Nuggets and the Sixers, you put Embiid or Jokic out there. But I do think this Bucks team is just built the best right now. They still do have Giannis's younger brother on the team. I don't think he'll do much, but he's always there for the morale boost. He was the coach of the celebrity team this year that Jesser was on, so he can give him a good he's a good locker room guy for them. But overall, I mean, this team, you still have Jay Crowder too, who I don't know if he'll play that much. But this team, the top 7 or 8, which will actually be their even 9 too, if you have Cam Payne, Pat Connaughton, Jay Crowder, and Bobby Portis, who Bobby Portis, one of the best 6 men in the league. I don't want to brush over that, but he's been great too. Overall, this team has been good, has been great the past few years. My only question is the coaching, but with a team like the Celtics too, I think coaching is definitely a question mark there. And both of these teams are really good, but there's a lot of teams that we could see come in. I know we were both very big on the Cavs last year, kind of disappointing the way they went out, but they're a very young team. They have one of the best defensive packages right now between Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. You have guys like Donovan Mitchell out there too. They're great. And on paper, these teams are very good. We've said in the past few years, teams like the Nets, who were one of the best we've ever seen on paper, we saw that happen. Nothing's really going to happen until we see these teams compete. I know the other day they were asking Joel Embiid how he felt about the Celtics and the Bucks going past them, and he basically said, I mean, the teams can look as good as they want, but you never really know what's going to happen until we see these teams compete. And I still think the Sixers could compete with these teams on paper. They're not as great, but if they can build that depth, if they can trade James Harden away and get some good depth pieces, I think they'll be in there too. I know we've talked about the Knicks too. They may not have the greatest roster out there, but they play with grit. The Cavs, a very young roster that's been getting well too with Donovan Mitchell. There's a lot of good contenders in the East, but I think it would be silly for us to both not say that the Bucks and the Celtics do look the best on paper right now.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about the difference between on paper and on court. And although the Celtics and the Bucks are up there, I have to give credit to teams like the Sixers and the Knicks and the Cavs that all kept their roster pretty similar. I mean, excuse me. I mean, these teams competed last year. Obviously, I wasn't super high on the Knicks, but oh my goodness, they look like they're making another run. Wow. The Knicks always get me choked up. My point is, these teams kept it together. They could be fighting as well.
Yeah. And overall, I mean, like you said, a lot of these teams very solid going into this year. We're going to see a lot of other teams that might be able to sneak in there. Overall, the East hasn't been that great the past few years. It's very top heavy. Teams like the Heat, who lost a lot of star players, I know they're always up there in the question mark. Atlanta could be solid. Their roster isn't that great. It just really depends on how good we see from Trae Young. Teams like Washington or Orlando, Charlotte, they have solid pieces, but they're really not that great overall. So I think we will probably see these top 5 teams being the Knicks, Celtics, Sixers, Cavs, and Bucks all really compete against each other. But I'd be very surprised if the Celtics and the Bucks aren't the 2 teams that come out of the East, especially after how they've retooled. Even last year when the Sixers had the chance to beat the Celtics, obviously they couldn't get it done. So unless something really happens and they either trade James Harden away for 3 very good role players, or if they somehow end up with another star player, it'd be very hard for me to throw them in there, even putting that bias aside. But I do think that the Bucks are still the top dog in the East, especially after getting Dame. I mean, on paper, Dame and Giannis, especially with the duos that we've seen in the past, there's been a lot of question marks with guys like Kyrie Irving and James Harden and Kevin Durant, kind of their loyalty. I don't think Dame or Giannis, there's any questions between any of their loyalty or even them just working hard. I think it just comes down to coaching. And the one thing that I do want to say with the Sixers is with Nick Nurse, he could go out there and he could completely change this team. We saw what he did with the Raptors with Kawhi. He's going to go out there with Joel Embiid this year. And in his first year with the Raptors, they won the championship with Kawhi and the good pieces surrounding him. So we'll see how good he is with the Sixers. He should be the best coach they've had in a while. Glenn Rivers was not very good. He was good in the regular season, but when it came time to making adjustments, wasn't good. So hopefully we can see a new philosophy in Philly. Maybe some more guys will be able to come in with the James Harden trade. But as of right now, I got to go with the Bucks.
Yeah, and we just talked about some philosophies that weren't working in basketball. Let's kick it over to the NFL, where we talk about probably the hottest name in all of football right now, and not for the right reasons. The Cincinnati Bengals. I mean, they've started off the season 1-3. Joe Burrow's injury looks like it's really creeping in, and overall, just not doing anything close to what you or I expected this season. So, with that in mind, are the Bengals done for, or do we see a turnaround coming later this season?
Yeah, and I think the big question mark here is depending on what happens with Joe Burrow. If Joe Burrow doesn't play this game against the Cardinals, who we saw almost beat the Giants, they beat the Cowboys, they could be in for a game where it could be very close. And especially without Joe Burrow in here, it's going to be very tough to compete against a lot of these teams. They have even more injuries outside of him. He's the biggest injury right now. I do think if he can play and they're healthy, they may not be that Super Bowl contender that we've seen at the beginning of the year. I know you had high hopes for them and Joe Burrow. Just for him, he hasn't even looked that good. I know the injury has been hurting him, but outside of that, even when he was supposedly healthy, he just hasn't made the good reads and good plays that we have known and seen from him throughout this season. So they may regret not letting him sit and getting fully healthy. But if he can come back from this injury, they may not be my Super Bowl favorite, but I still think they should be able to at least make the playoffs. If they don't even make the playoffs, then obviously a very big lost season since Joe Burrow, as we know, coming out of college, wasn't the youngest quarterback. So his lifespan as a quarterback for this team overall may be shorter than some other guys that we will talk about a little bit later.
Yeah. And obviously, I had very high hopes for the Bengals. I have them projected to win the Super Bowl. I mean, I think you had them projected to win 13 games. We are very high on this team because we have seen them perform at a high level in the past. And Joe Burrow being the head of that. I mean, he just doesn't look like himself this year. You can blame it all on injuries. I will say partially, I think some of it comes from that. He doesn't look as confident making plays outside of, his first or second read because I don't think he's mobile enough to do so right now. On paper, though, and we hate on paper, but we've seen it work in real life. There's so much talent on this team. I'm not willing to completely rule them out, especially on the offensive side. I think Jamar Chase and T. Higgins will both get it going, and I expect Burrow to step up and be the guy. This Cardinals game is almost make or break, and that is absolutely wild to say at this point in the season, especially with two teams. We saw projected to finish in very different spots this year. But as you mentioned, if Burrow is out, which he may need to be, he needs to recover from this injury at all costs and the Cardinals win, you start 1-4 with a loss to a team we thought might have been the worst team in the league, you might be sunk. I'm not going to lie to you. But if the Bengals can go out and win, they have some tough games on the schedule coming up, but they also have an easier stretch in the near future. I think they could string together some wins, and there's just too much talent on this team to rule them out. I think their defense is their biggest question mark, and their defense really hasn't even played that bad this year, all things considered. I think there's a lot of aspects of this Bengals team that aren't working. Some people will blame it on coaching. I got burned for some Zach Taylor takes a couple years ago, and he's looked good since. But hey, maybe I was just a couple years too early. Some Bengals fans might panic and want him on the way out. But I think they put 2 and 2 together and make the playoffs. I don't necessarily know if it's a Super Bowl contending team, but I think a wild card spot is still realistic at this point in the season. And we've seen the Bengals struggle early in the past. Maybe not this hard, but we've seen them bounce back. I don't really expect anything different here. So maybe it's not a 13-14 win team, but 10, 11, I still think is very realistic. And that would be enough to get him in the playoffs in pretty much any scenario.
Yeah, and I think even with that 10 wins, obviously, like you said, they should be able to make the playoffs in a very competitive division this year. But we have seen the Ravens struggle a little bit. We've seen the Steelers struggle with one of the worst offensive coordinators in the NFL. We've seen the Browns struggle. But I do want to ask you, moving on away from those teams, who do you think is the best team in the NFL right now? I know we came out with our power rankings, but I want to ask you personally, who do you think is your Super Bowl favorite? Considering you have the Bengals, they're kind of on a little bit of a downward spiral right now. Who's the best?
Yeah, and that's a tough question because we're so early, but I think it's a question we need to start asking because we've seen these teams play 4 games now. And my pick, I know we have the Niners 1 in our rankings. It would have to be the Eagles, I'm being honest. I mean, I think in my head, I like Jalen Hurts. I like the Eagles, but I was kind of anticipating maybe a bit of a downturn, and they played a tough game against DC. just last week, but they came out on top, and the Eagles look really, really solid. Obviously, Jason Kelsey is a popular name, great podcast. Him and his brother Travis are, figureheads of the NFL right now, but you got to give him credit. He's still playing like the best center in football, regardless of his age. The offensive line is great. Lane Johnson might be the best offensive tackle in all of football. And outside of the offensive line, we know they have weapons. Hurts is playing like that guy. The running back room, which I was very nervous about, looks great. Swift looks good. Gainwell looks good. I mean, they have guys there. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are going to be studs no matter what. And as we talked about in our video that should be going up later this week in our mock drafts, I mean, they just don't have a whole lot of holes. Their defense looks really solid. Their secondary is good. Love the pass rush, especially with Hassan Reddick on the team. They just don't have any parts of that team that I'm not bought in on. And every other contender, I mean, it's football. You're going to have some holes, and I really just don't see any with the Eagles right now. I know it's early. I know they could fall off. Jalen Hurts, although I really like him, think he's a top, 5-7 quarterback in football right now. I have concerns. He could fall off a little bit. The juice could run out at some point. But based on what I've seen on-field production and what we know about some of these star players, it's really hard for me not to say the Eagles have the best team in football. And they've looked it for 4 weeks so far.
Yeah. And kind of bouncing off from you, I know we both had the 49ers as the best team in the NFL, but if I'm going with the team who I think right now could win the Super Bowl, I got to stick with the Chiefs. They do have the worst right tackle in football right next to Evan Neal. I mean, through the first few weeks, we've seen this team with Jawan Taylor give up a plethora of penalties. We saw him give up that safety this week with the holding in the end zone. But even despite Patrick Mahomes having one of his worst outings of his career against the Jets this week, he still found a way to win, especially at the end of the game. I know a lot of people may chalk it up to the refs, whatever you want to put out there. I'm not a Chiefs fan, so at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter to me too much. Patrick Mahomes made those plays with his legs, and he made a lot of plays that we saw from a guy like Sam Hartman the other night against Duke too. This guy has come out here this season, and I think the Chiefs, being one of these top end teams, if right tackle is their biggest issue right now with Mahomes being able to scramble out of the pocket, you could feel very comfortable giving up a first or a second round pick to get a tackle, considering you expect to be drafting at the end of the first round. I think they could go out, get a guy like La'el Collins, even go trade with a team like Arizona for Beachum. You could do whatever you want really at this point. I mean, you drafted Morris in the 3rd round, and you haven't really tested him out too much. He was a big guy this year. He was high up in my draft boards from Oklahoma, so you could always give the rookie a shot, and I still think they're the best team. I know we both have the 49ers as the best right now. I think they're playing the best, but when I look at a guy like Brock Purdy, who has been good, I'm not completely bought in because they're going to play against the Cowboys this week. This is a very big game for them. The Cowboys dropped the game to the Cardinals, which was very weird. I don't like giving credit to the Cowboys, but they have looked very good this year. And when we see them play against the 49ers, I really want to see how Brock Purdy does. Because if he folds against that defense, it's going to be very tough. We saw the 49ers be very good last year. They folded to the Eagles defense in the NFC Championship. I know he was hurt and everything going on then. But I just think if we're talking about quarterback play, the 49ers may have the best team overall, but I can't really count on a team that has Patrick Mahomes. The same sentiment that everyone had the past 20 years with Tom Brady. I think Patrick Mahomes is garnering that respect too, despite this offensive line looking solid outside of the right tackle position. I do think the Eagles are looking very good too. But that Cowboys 49ers game is going to be a very big tell this week. I think if the 49ers can knock off the Cowboys and Brock Purdy looks good, I think they would be the best team in football. But as of right now, I think Micah Parsons and that defense may just be too much for Brock Purdy, but he could prove me wrong.
Yeah, and Ben, you picked a team that I think we both can agree has the best quarterback in the league, right? Patrick Mahomes is that guy. And I know your favorite team, the Giants, has been getting a lot of flack because some people will say that you have the worst QB play in the league. So with that in mind, I think the question on a lot of people's minds is Daniel Jones really the worst quarterback in the league? And if not, who do you think is?
Yeah. So I'm going to come out here, obviously, defend Daniel Jones. I think if you put any quarterback in a situation where he gets 1.5 seconds to throw the ball behind the worst offensive line in the NFL, then they're not going to succeed. Now, there are some points in this game that you look at that definitely are his fault. That fumble that came, He didn't have the pocket awareness to, even though there was 3 guys rushing him, he still probably could have tucked that away. The pick in the end zone, that pick six, definitely his fault. The second pick of the game, though, which I'm sure you guys have seen the videos of, when Evan Neal blocks his own teammate and then an edge rusher just comes in and hits Daniel Jones, he has to throw it away. It just isn't good. I mean, they're on their backup guards. They're putting guards in at center. John Michael Schmitz got hurt last game, who was looking solid. His first game, he had some issues, but besides that, he's looked all right. I do think if you put a guy like Justin Fields in the Giants offense, and Justin Fields has 4 seconds to throw the ball. I think if you give Daniel Jones the Bears offense, he would look a lot better than Justin Fields looks. And I still think Daniel Jones is still better than Justin Fields up to this point. I mean, if you guys watched my video recently, Justin Fields is a league low at pretty much whatever you want to bring up. He only throws the ball 6 yards. His 4.4 net yards puts him at 32nd in the NFL. There's only 32 teams. 4.5 interception percentage, which would be the 4th highest. 58 completion percentage, which puts him at 31st. I mean, he's supposed to be this dynamic rusher, and we saw them up. He had a very good game this week against the Broncos. They were up 28-7, and then they blew the game. He ended up having a chance at the end of the game where he could go down, get them in field goal range, get a touchdown, whatever you want to win the game. And he had terrible pocket awareness. Back-to-back plays, he threw the ball out of bounds, and he got the intentional grounding and then threw an interception on the next play, and that wrote off pretty much what the whole Bears season has been. I do think Daniel Jones may not look the best right now, and it may not be fair to say that it's completely the offensive line's fault. I think there is still some issues with Daniel Jones as a quarterback. He's not the best in the league by any chance, but he can still be a top 20 guy. And we saw that last year when the offensive line was solid and the wide receiver core was a lot worse last year than it is now. So if this offensive line could figure it out, I still think they could be somewhat decent this year. Obviously not competing for anything, but you still got to go out there and figure this out somehow, because you're a team that made the playoffs last year that I was expecting. I know both of us expected them to win at least like 8, 9, 10 games this year, and it's not looking good. They're playing the Bills and the Dolphins. They could easily end up 1-5, and then the rest of the season pretty much a wash at that point.
Yeah, for sure. And Justin Fields, I'm the certified Justin Fields defender on this channel, but we both know he doesn't look that good. But if we're going to talk about the worst quarterback in the NFL, I want to talk about a guy that has, probably a higher floor, but a much lower ceiling than a guy like Justin Fields. Fields, as you mentioned, he looked pretty good against the Broncos. He's not clutch by any means. I think he showed that as well. But statistically, he had a good game, and he has some versatility as a rusher. Whether he actually has an arm or not, to be determined. Maybe we'll never see it, but Desmond Ridder is a guy I really want to come on here and talk about. I think I went easy on him. It was actually pretty nice about him earlier in the season because he wasn't throwing picks. He was being a game manager. But, I mean, looking at his stats now, he has less than 750 yards through 4 games, 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. And after winning week 1, the Falcons have looked pretty bad. They're 2-2 right now, 2 straight losses, and they just need a better quarterback. The Falcons are an interesting team because they're not scared to draft offensive weapons early. London, Pitts, Bijan. And of course, Bijan's getting involved in the game, especially with Algier having some injury problems. But Kyle Pitts isn't getting the football. I don't care if you want to chalk it up to the offensive coordinator, the head coach, the offensive line, whatever you want to call it. Eventually, you got to start blaming the quarterback for not giving one of the best weapons in football. Honestly, one of the best weapons in football. He hasn't even shown it because he doesn't get the ball. And it comes down to the quarterback eventually. My biggest problems with Fields is that he's not a good decision maker. I would say Ritter's a better decision maker, but Fields has, shown some versatility outside the pocket. He can move and, he doesn't make decisions well, but Ridder doesn't do anything that well, if I'm being honest. There's a reason he wasn't a first-round pick after being so good at Cincinnati. He just has problems in his game. He's not an elite, accurate quarterback. He doesn't have a crazy arm, and he's not creative. And those are things you need in a Falcons offense that looks to be high-paced and doing a lot of different stuff. I just don't think Ritter's the guy for it. And I think Falcons fans might be a little bit too invested in him. But at the end of the day, he was a second-round pick. And we see second-round pick QBs just not ever get playing time. Kyle Trask, we haven't seen Will Levis yet. We haven't seen Malik Willis get a whole lot of time. And Malik Willis was a third rounder, but you get my point. I mean, this wasn't a first round guy you invested heavily into. We'll talk about it in our mock draft, but if there's quarterbacks on the board for the Falcons, I don't think you can just pass them up because Ritter's your guy. I don't think Ritter's proven he is the guy. The Falcons have a lot of different directions they can go. Maybe fans will be mad I say Ritter's the worst quarterback in football right now, but look at the numbers. He's not doing anything that sets him apart from the bottom half of the pack. And he's a guy that I considered, and I went on a limb in my QB rankings. I said he was better than guys like Baker Mayfield. I said he was better than unproven guys like CJ Stroud, and that's not even close to true right now. Ritter has really disappointed me. He doesn't look good. And if I can be honest, it doesn't really matter how many games the Falcons win this year. If he continues to play like this, you got to go somewhere different at quarterback.
Yeah. And one other name that I'll throw in the hat here that I know a lot of people haven't been big fans of right now. I know both of us weren't very high on him in the draft a few years ago. Kenny Pickett has not looked very good for the Steelers this year. 4 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. He's had a pick in almost every game except for one, but it's still evened out. I know a lot of people want to blame this offensive coordinator. They want to blame a lot of different things on the offense, but Kenny Pickett's a guy that they drafted in the first round. They invested a good amount in. Wasn't a top 5 pick by any means, so you're not really that invested in him at the end of the day, but he was old. He's 25 now already in his second season. So a lot of question marks around a guy like him, because even if you get a new offensive coordinator, even if you blame Matt Canada, still it comes back on Kenny Pickett, and his quarterback play hasn't been that great. He's one of the guys where last game he threw for 114 yards, no touchdowns and an interception, which is terrible. I mean, that the passing yards there, he's competing with Justin Fields, which is never a good thing. We've seen him throw the ball a good amount. We saw him throw the ball a lot against the 49ers, 46 times. He ended up with 232 passing yards, and that tied. He actually had more passing yards against the Raiders in 28 attempts than he did with 46 attempts and 31 completions. This guy doesn't throw the ball down the field. He has a QBR of less than 30. And I think you could make an argument that he's one of the worst. I mean, right now we're picking at straws between guys that are all not that great. I know another guy you could throw in there would be Zach Wilson. Last game, at least he showed a little bit of heart out there, almost beat the Chiefs. I know a lot of people, like I said before, could say that the refs gave the Chiefs the game, whatever you want to say, but he at least looked solid. And between these teams, like the Steelers, the Falcons, I know the Steelers, there hasn't really been talk about a quarterback since they still believe in Kenny Pickett. But I mean, the Steelers and the Falcons, like we saw in our mock drafts this week, they could both be in for a quarterback.
Yeah, and the Steelers are super interesting because, like the Falcons, they're not a team that's scared to invest in their offense either. Obviously, they went tackle in this year's draft. They took George Pickens early in the second round. But with that being said, I agree. I don't think Kenny Pickett's one of the best QBs in the league. I don't like his wide receiver room as much as it seems like everybody else does. Don't get me wrong. Pickens is cool and all. I think he's probably the most overrated player in the NFL right now. He just has trouble getting open, and that could, again, be blamed on Matt Canada. He doesn't run a lot of great routes for Pickens usually. But at the end of the day, Pickens has to be the one on the field making the plays. And I just don't think he does it at a super high level. Deontay Johnson seems like has always been hurt the last couple of years. So Pickett doesn't have a ton to work with, but it's another guy like Justin Fields who doesn't have a lot to work with. You still have to do stuff. I mean, CJ Stroud doesn't have a lot to work with, and I could argue that he's playing like a top 10 QB right now. So at the end of the day, you need quarterback play. It doesn't matter what your weapons or your coaching looks like. So I think Kenny Pickett's a very fair name to throw in there. I guess the bigger point of the argument is that Daniel Jones is just not nearly as bad as some of these guys. His stats might be similar right now, but we've seen him perform at a higher level, especially because he's versatile. It's a word we use a lot, but he really does fit the description at the quarterback position. So with guys like this still in the league and being starters, even Zach Wilson obviously has to be the starter this season, which we didn't anticipate. With guys like this, Daniel Jones doesn't look too bad. I think there's bigger problems at the quarterback position. And because maybe some people expected more out of the Giants, and the fact that the Giants have been playing on prime time a lot this year, I think people are getting a little too overzealous to say Daniel Jones is the worst. But I mean, with more games like this, if they do start 1-5, maybe we'll revisit this conversation. He will be on this list.
Yeah, and also, I mean, we're seeing other teams too that we'll see. I mean, Taylor Heineke could come in for the Falcons depending on how bad Desmond Ritter is for the rest of the year. I don't really expect Kenny Pickett to be benched. We could see the Bears trade away Justin Fields. I know there's been some rumors about that this year. So a lot could happen in the NFL right now at the quarterback position. It's one of the positions where we highlighted at the beginning of the year. The top 7 or 8 guys are very good. And outside of that, I mean, there's a lot of arguments that could be made. We've seen CJ Stroud, as we said in our top 10 quarterbacks to start this season. We had some guys that were kind of on the edge of the top 10 that we questioned. CJ Stroud could definitely be in there by the end of the season. He's looked fantastic. So a lot of season left to play. And with that being said, with a lot of big games going on next week, we'll have some different power rankings with the 49ers and the Cowboys playing. I think it's fair to say that whoever wins that game would probably take the #1 spot for us right now. Cowboys have looked really good. And the 49ers have looked really good too. The Eagles and the Chiefs all playing well, and a lot of teams playing bad, including the Patriots and the Giants. But we can come on here, as you guys will see tomorrow with our mock draft, who the Patriots and Giants will go with. So a lot in the future. We're probably already going to start with our draft scouting already, since the Patriots and Giants seasons have pretty much been over since week 1. But with that being said, we'll see you guys next week with a little bit more discourse on the NBA, a little bit more coming in by then, and the NFL.
See you guys next time.